everyone, and welcome to the State of Social Procurement webinar series. I'm Alison Carter, IPA's Social Impact Manager, and I'm delighted that you could join today's conversation on the topic of boost supply. Along with our panelists, we have Wendy Bezzina, who's the Executive Director for Social Procurement and Impact at Social Traders, Herani Demuth, who is the Capability Manager for Amotai New Zealand Aotearoa, and Jada Pleiter, who is the founder and CEO of Panku Safety Solutions. And I'm also really pleased to have James Muscat once again joining us. He's the manager for IPA. Before we proceed to the Acknowledgement of Country, I thought I would just run through some of the logistics so you know what to expect from today. So let me just share that slide. It doesn't look like it's sharing. I'm not sure if anyone can see that. Oh, you can. Great, you can see that. It's not got a nice little green boundary around it, so it's not very reassuring. If you can see that slide about what to expect, you'll see here that we are recording. We also have enabled auto transcript. And there's also going to be a couple of anonymous polls run today. So please do participate in those without fear of being identified. And also we're encouraging you to post your questions in the Q&A section of your controls. So there's the chat, which we do encourage you to participate in. Please do keep comments respectful and on topic. And then if any questions arise during the discussion that you'd like to ask the panelists, please do add those to the Q&A tab, which is next to the chat in your controls. Also in the chat, we're going to be posting a link to the recording of our first webinar, as well as the link to the full research report, which has been posted on the SIPS website. All right, so for the Acknowledgement of Country, in the spirit of reconciliation, I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the Whadjuk Noongar lands from which I'm hosting this webinar and their connection to land, sea and community. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and I extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. We have an opportunity to get a little bit of a background to the State of Social Procurement report with a video. I thought that might be better than hearing me recap it again. So let me do a new share, and that should bring up the video for you. So there you are. That's an introduction and an overview of the key insights. Please do have a look at the full report. And also please do extend an acknowledgement of country if you wish in the chat. James, I'm wondering if that's a good time now for us to run our first poll also so we can get a sense of who's participating. Would you mind being able to do that?
Hi, Alison.
Hello.
So we have 90% of the people in the webinar today have participated. So I'm going to end the poll now.
Great.
And share those results. So interestingly, the largest proportion of people coming from a particular sector here are intermediary or capacity building. Followed closely by private or for-profit enterprise.
Great.
And then equally benefit supplier, social enterprise, and charity not-for-profit. In terms of the supplier or buyer representation, 50% are suppliers, 25% are buyers.
That's great. That's a larger representation from part one. We're seeing more suppliers as part of this conversation. So that's why Boost Supply is obviously so pertinent. Thanks very much, James. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
I think we can start getting on with the conversation. So let me make sure that I'm sharing the right screen. And that should bring up some of the beautiful graphics of the key insights of the internal barriers. So I think we're up to that first question, Wendy, which is are government and sector requirements, private sector requirements, stifling supply? So we know that there were barriers in the research within organisations around resourcing commitments, competing organisational objectives, as well as lack of knowledge or experience. And I wonder if that's feeding into the design of contracts. Can you tell us a little bit from Social Traders' perspective?
Thanks, Alison, and just like to add that I'm coming to you from Gunno-Kurnai, land of the Briarclan people today. So yes, I don't think it's necessarily stifling supply, but there definitely are some barriers. So, and if businesses understood what they were, then they could definitely address them. So for example, timelines, the buyers need to understand the lead times, maybe longer for social enterprises to deliver on their project. So early engagement is really key to giving social enterprises the best opportunity to participate. So on major projects, for example, landscaping might be something that's the last item to finalise on a project. However, plants will take up to 6 months to grow. So early engagement outlining potential quantities of the project enables the social enterprise the time to grow a quality and suitable product. And the commitment to social procurement outcomes. So not all of those really accessing the social procurement spend are really truly committed to it and its impact. And so then it becomes a bit of a box ticking exercise where they do it because it's been mandated for them. So there are organisations out there who truly understand the impact and the outcomes for social enterprises, and they're the ones who are really leading the way in social procurement. So it's really getting that sort of understanding and commitment up front to the true outcomes of social procurement. When you're looking at contractual obligations, whether the penalties or the structure of the contract is really limiting participation. So sometimes it's about unbundling a contract so that, smaller enterprises can actually participate in that. But it's also things around the margins for a social enterprise will be really tight. And it's just looking at where are the penalties or timelines within a contract that might, absorb their margin really quickly. If there's deadlines to achieve and they don't achieve those timelines, is there a penalty that takes their whole margin? And I've experienced it firsthand for a social enterprise where if they missed by just one day, they had to discount their price by 20%, which was their entire margin. So it means that's a barrier for them to participate in that particular project. But I also see it's just around that lack of knowledge as well for some of the buyers. So at Social Traders, we work with our business and government members to really identify opportunities within their businesses and also do specific social procurement education sessions within organisations that are more around social procurement, what it is, how buyers can engage with social enterprises, and some of the things that they will need to consider in achieving that really significant and impactful spend with social enterprises.
And that's obviously, I illustrated there the role of the intermediary in building that knowledge and creating some runs on the ground so that there is experience within buyer organisations. Herani, that might be a good opportunity for you to also share the Wellington Council experience around their contracting requirements and how, with the input from yourself, there was actually an increase in supply that they experienced on that one tender contract that I think you've told us about previously.
Sure, thank you, Alison, and tēnā koutou katoa from Wellington, New Zealand. Yes, thanks, Alison. We're very new to this space. It's only been a mandated requirement since the end of 2020, so a scant year. And I'd have to say, anecdotally, those are exactly the things that we are finding challenging ourselves, organisational factors and competing organisational, I guess, priorities. But in talking with our local council here in Wellington, initially they were sending me things that were going to tender that week. So I might get a call or an email on Tuesday and it was going to tender on Friday, which if you're thinking that that's going to engage Indigenous businesses when everybody else has had a 6-month run-in, because actually they're already the client, they've already been the supplier. Yeah, so we had some conversations, and through that conversation, I understood that they were really struggling to get suppliers in some areas. And one particular one, they had put a contract up on our government tendering website. It was quite a large contract, certainly for our small and medium-sized businesses, and they hadn't had any bids. So I just asked what sector it was in, and I knew straight away that there were 4 or 5 Māori-owned businesses in that space in Wellington that probably had around between 30 and 50 staff in each of those. So I suggested, would he, and this is the trick, I think, because procurement officers are generally risk averse, would he consider, given that they'd had no one tender for it, running a closed tender for the 5 businesses that I thought might have capacity? And he said, well, yeah, we'll give it a look. We're not committing to anything, but the result was that one of those businesses was awarded the tender. The council were over the moon because he said to me, we would never have known about those businesses because we haven't previously worked with them. And even if they'd put in a tender, if others had, then they would go with the known because they're risk averse. So sometimes it's about having the conversations we're finding and also identifying smaller packets of work that might introduce them to suppliers, to diverse suppliers really, and help build a relationship and an understanding of how those businesses work and also them understanding council. So that's an exciting piece of work going forward that I'm really looking forward to this year.
I can imagine that is really rewarding. Thanks very much for describing that. Jada, you experienced some increased opportunity in crisis settings, and I'm wondering if you can tell us what your experience has been as a supplier.
Sure. So I'm coming today from Noongar country, and I just want to acknowledge all the elders, past, present and emerging here. So yeah, COVID really presented a great opportunity for us. My business is in personal protective equipment and safety. And so obviously there was a massive demand for COVID essential supplies. We hadn't been able to get any kind of traction or entry with government through the normal procurement channels. But when sort of COVID hit, it changed the normal procurement model to a crisis procurement model, which meant they weren't bound to their incumbent providers who weren't able to supply their needs. And it opened the door for us to be able to supply. Through that, we were able to demonstrate our capability and capacity to meet critical requirement throughout the pandemic to the Department of Justice and Department of Transport and like, so fairly large organisations where very time sensitive requirement as well. And we've become, as a result of that, a preferred supplier. And that opportunity, Herani mentioned the risk adverse nature of procurement. We would never have had that opportunity. There is a perception that small businesses or Indigenous businesses or social procurement businesses may not have capacity or capability. And so we never get the opportunity which would build that or which would demonstrate it. So it's kind of like a chicken and egg thing too. Sometimes you need to be given the opportunity to be able to build your capacity and capability or to be able to demonstrate it. However, we have experienced that as soon as things went back to business as usual, those barriers were straight back there again. And it wasn't just a barrier for us to supply, it's actually become a barrier for those departments to procure from us. We established really good, strong relationships and, go to for a lot of different things throughout that period. But they're now unable to just procure from us either where they might want to. So it's become a barrier both ways.
I'm hoping that you can still hear me. I'm getting a little signal saying my internet connection is unstable, but I'm hearing you loud and clear, Jada, and I'm wondering if that could feed into our second question, because really, is it a misconception about capability and capacity amongst suppliers? How can communication in business as usual settings encourage a more inclusive economy? Do you have any examples that you can share?
Look, I think that for Indigenous businesses, and it may well be the case for social procurement, social enterprises as well, but for Indigenous businesses, it always starts with relationship. Even the way that we would introduce ourselves is, this is who I am, this is my mob, this is my country, where are you from, what's your family? We start with relationship, we don't go straight to business. It starts with relationship and then the business unfolds as a result of that relationship growing. And I think that there is a perception that there is a lack of capability or capacity that is a massive barrier to overcome. There's some unconscious bias as well that comes into play. But I think if there is a willingness, and I know Wendy sort of referred to this, if there's a commitment and a willingness to and an intention to engage with the social procurement sector to procure with that social procurement ethic in mind, then identifying opportunities, building relationship, getting to know your businesses, I found the most effective opportunities are ones where a company has gone, well, this is an opportunity we have. Who is out there in that social procurement or Indigenous business sector who could, like Herani was saying, who could deliver on this? Let's have a conversation with them. Let's find out what the barriers are for them, because sometimes they're actually really small barriers. So, they're things that you can actually, if you just tweak that procurement process, you can remove those barriers. And an example is, we've had an opportunity to, supply 10 million rapid antigen tests. So for, I think that's quite a large sort of opportunity. Obviously, the outlay for something like that's quite large. So there needs to be a conversation around payment terms. And if there's a willingness to engage around that and to have that conversation, it's something that can be overcome. Or it may be that the service model that they're used to in that construction industry might be a just-in-time service expectation. So, you know, if we require it today, we want it delivered today. For a small business, that's very difficult. Can tie up your resources on very low value orders. So there may be a conversation around changing that service model to a weekly drop of, you know, orders. So you're not tied up running around. So little things like that can make a really big difference. But that only comes out when you actually have the conversation, get to know the business, they get to know you too, and what your requirements and service expectations are, and then you can form, you can get value that's mutually beneficial.
Thanks, Jada. Wendy, have you seen almost a light bulb moment? I imagine that you have a lot of conversations with your buyer members in helping to realise where those tweaks that Jada mentioned to contract requirements might enable more inclusive purchasing.
Yeah, so a lot of organisations, I guess, just struggle with that competitive pricing, but also, yeah, those contractual arrangements that really aren't inclusive. So Jada's, yeah, outlined quite a few there. And I think it's just really having that knowledge and understanding. So working with those business and government members, if it is, to understand what those, the needs are of those organisations, and then what those contract details are, and how that can just be broken down or, you know, edited, changed, how it can meet the needs to be much more inclusive.
And there, I imagine you're also facilitating the consideration of risk, because you are talking about, say, exploring these opportunities through a lower risk or a smaller kind of time frame. It's the type of contract or product that's being purchased also that you provide some insights on.
Yes, definitely. So I think with a lot of the social enterprises that we work with, it's really, you know, they have some risk measures, and some may not have that, you know, fully commercial risk assessment where they look at a contract and say, what are the risks here? Can we do it? Can't we do it? You know, they have the capability, but do they have the capacity to deliver within a time frame? So it's definitely sort of just breaking down all those elements of it and really trying to make it as inclusive as possible, but it's that early engagement that gets that opportunity to adjust things and make it fit for an inclusive social procurement environment.
Herani, do you have any experience of examples also where perhaps perceived commitment doesn't really play out when tendering opportunities are opened?
I have, and I've got also on the positive side as well, if I think about it. So, you know,
we like positive stories.
Yeah, I referred to the very short notice requests that I tended to feel like, are you just ticking a box? Because, you know, is this for real? And then there have been other ones where we're asked for the hardest piece of work, subcontracting to fill. You know, like there was one time we were asked for helicopter pilots. They were building tracks, rebuilding like $1 million hut and a bridge, but they wanted to know if there were any Māori helicopter pilots. And I was like, is that genuine? Like, you know. But anyway, to get onto a more positive experience, so with organisations who have made that commitment to think about how they might work differently to achieve broader social outcomes, one of ours would be Auckland Transport. They had a whole lot of car parking that they were doing, and it turned out that those car parks were outside marae. And so they thought, hey, this might be a good opportunity. They worked with Amotai, they ran a closed tender, and they awarded it to a company that clearly had the capability. On getting the tender, on winning it, that was a couple of young guys sort of in their early 30s. First time they'd had a large contract, sort of multi-million-dollar contract. they realised when they went to the bank that they needed to put up security, and the security was going to be their homes, and their wives were not happy because they hadn't had to do that in the past. So they actually came back to Amotai, and they went back to Auckland Transport and said, we don't think we can take this contract. And the really aha moment for me was listening to that procurement officer say that. I thought, well, why do we need this $2 million guarantee? Have we needed to use it in the past? And he looked back 5 years and they'd never had to call in a guarantee. And then he thought, well, gee, you know, I think I can waive that. I think I can waive that and take that little bit of risk, because it's a risk balanced by what I already know, is that it's not very often. And then he said, what's the other risk? Might be supply, you know, but I already know I've got all the guys I would normally use. So I don't really have a problem if they can't deliver. So he awarded it anyway. And then at the meeting I was at, he talked about how the contract was delivered on time, on budget. Everyone was happy, and Auckland Transport had found a new supplier that they were happy to keep engaging. So I think, yeah, it's kind of both sides. And when I talk about the side where people are short notice asking, I think that that's part of the evolution of this new way of thinking. And it's also helping procurement officers understand that they need to open the door from the inside, and that comes through support from the top of the organisation. If people know that they'll be supported to take a little risk, then maybe we get to celebrate who we're engaging and the benefits that might have in the wider community, then I think we'll see more people prepared to really commit.
Herani, you're echoing a lot of the insights that were shared in part one when we were talking about target impact, but also building on the comments that Jada said there around the importance of communication, and Wendy saying the social trader's role is definitely about encouraging the supplier to canvass what their needs or limitations are, and then similarly for the buyer as well, what are they willing to take on balance. And I think it's so important, if we're talking about avoiding the ticker box approach, that there is leadership. So thank you very much for that example. Speaking about impact areas, James, I think that's time for our second poll, if I recall correctly. That's our next topic. Yes, there we are. So procurement areas with targets. In what corporate responsibility areas does your organisation set targets? For part one, we definitely saw employment outcomes and environmental outcomes were predominant, but also interesting to see that a lot of the poll respondents tackled multiple areas, and that makes sense, I guess. If you're a larger organisation with a fairly sophisticated supply chain, you have the opportunity to generate social value through your procurement across multiple target areas. And obviously a lot of these align with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals framework, so that makes it a little easier for corporate responsibility reporting. But it can also just go down to, if you're a small business wishing to add some purpose and activate that through your purchasing decisions, you can make contributions to local economic development, for example, as well.
Yeah, well, I was going to actually
So far we've got 56% of participants have responded to the poll questions. So if anyone's remaining, please just use the next few seconds to respond if you can, and then we can share those results with everyone.
After this, we also have a chance to canvass some questions that might have been posted. I'm not sure if any have been. When I had a look at the Q&A, it looks like people are a little bit shy and not willing to post some questions. Or maybe the panel is so great that they're just answering all of the questions as they're arising, which is probably more likely. But something I'm interested in that we might tackle later on is in the overview video of the research, there were opportunities around digital tools and the types of platforms that make it easier for procurement professionals to incorporate social value. And that might be a little holder question in case anybody is aware of any programs that are useful. I'm hoping that Shelley's in the audience today, and that was something that she and I discussed from a local council perspective recently. So that's a holder question in case that's something that anybody wants to contribute to from the panel. Otherwise, we can proceed on to question 3 once the poll results come through.
So we've got 72% now. So I'll end the poll and share those results with everybody. And you'll be able to see that the target set for procurement spend, 58% inclusive economy, which examples of that are Indigenous suppliers and social enterprises. Then 50% workforce recruitment, diversity recruitment, gender. And also then we have environment and local economy equal at 35%. But actually also a not applicable answer as well, interestingly. So we had 35% of respondents say not applicable.
That's great, James. Thanks. Yeah, interesting to see workforce recruitment comes up predominantly. And of course, it makes sense because we know that employment and financial security is such a important factor in well-being. And that's definitely how we measure the social value that we're generating at IPA as an accredited social enterprise with social traders, is how are we contributing, how effective are we at contributing to candidate well-being, and then also how we are supporting workforce participation. All right, so maybe now we can go on to the next burning question, which relates to, or it's really our final one. And Herani, I'm going to get you to sort of share your experiences first, but here you can see the key findings. It relates to the question of whether accreditation and certification by intermediaries is really what we see as the key enabler or the key lever for boosting social procurement. And Herani, we know that Amotai is younger than social traders, and you're on a bit of a new journey. So I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about how that all started.
Thanks, Alison. So it started with our largest council actually in New Zealand, which is Auckland City Council. And they were challenged actually, I think, through their Māori business networks. What are you doing to contribute to your local community? How much do you actually spend with Māori? We make up, and Pacific people, we make up a large part of the population. And I think that was an ongoing discussion for about 5 years. But it ultimately culminated in that council in about 2019, I think 2019, they ran a pilot that they would, well, you know, if you've got some Māori businesses, we can try them with our smaller contracts. They have said that what they normally would do is if they had a large contract and then a smaller one for like $1 million came in because they're the big ones, they would ask them to deliver it, or even if it was for like under 100K, that's what they would do. They would go to the big boys and ask them, can you do it? But what happened there then was they'd say yes, clip the ticket and kick it down the chain, so that there wasn't a lot of value left in it for the people who ultimately were delivering the work. So council found that they got much better service and immediate service when they followed up or if they had a problem. And as a result of that, they decided that they were going to implement in 2020, just before COVID, that they were going to implement a target of 7% for their council. Now, I have to say they had initially they had been influenced by what you've been doing in Australia and what else is happening around the world. But I think it really showed their willingness to commit, because they set targets that escalated over 3 years to 15% of their spend, and they spend $2 billion a year up in Auckland. So yeah, they committed to supply diversity, to social procurement, environmental outcomes, the whole broad spectrum. And at the end of 2020, the New Zealand government was wondering how on earth they're going to help their economy, and a lot of people, through, you know, interruptions in the supply chain, were starting to think, do we need to buy more locally? Do we need to make sure we've got a local economy? And out of that came a government priority that 5% of government spend would go to Māori businesses. And that's been really interesting, because the largest number we've only been doing this for 12 months, but the largest number of people that have brought in, or businesses, are actually for-profit businesses that are not government. So although some government have, they're still figuring out, as your report shows, right, how to do it. They like the idea of it, but they've got no idea. So for us, having a certification process enables those buyers that are keen and early adapters to have some comfort and certainty that the organisations they are partnering with are at least 50% Māori owned or Pacific owned. And so that's really what Amotai have been doing, is that we've been working to connect those Māori and Pacific owned businesses with opportunities.
It's a fantastic story, and great to see that Australia has helped drive that as well. Social Traders has also experienced some growth. Wendy, can you tell us a little bit about the experience there, building on what you're seeing now, given that social procurement is arguably, particularly within Victoria, maybe New South Wales and Queensland, maturing, and more people across beyond government are starting to recognise the opportunities there?
Oh, so we're definitely working across Australia. So we have a national footprint for the organisation. So really working with all the different government organisations. Victoria's definitely led the way with the social procurement framework. Other states now are getting on board with that and really looking to, you know, set the strategy and encourage social procurement across the nation. And certification definitely does enable social procurement, and it's necessary to define and really certify those social enterprises. It provides the integrity to the marketplace about an organisation's true purpose and what their outcomes are, and they are truly a social enterprise. And Social Traders certification model has really been built its model through researching social enterprise internationally and looking at the other methodologies in the UK, Canada, the US and New Zealand, and then work to put some integrity around that by co-designing the framework, factoring in, you know, the social enterprises themselves, legal and commercial considerations, and working with Ernst Young and Minter Alison to do that. And then look to be a really competitive international certification. So, you know, work closely with the KENA in New Zealand as well. And it really serves to protect those social enterprises against social washing by having that rigorous certification standard. So we're working with our social enterprises and our business and government members to increase the maturity in both the social enterprise capacity and their capability, but also in the business and government space to really build their social procurement engagement with those social enterprises, and then, you know, that spend, so that you know, it's really sort of resonating and becoming to a really mature level on both sides of the marketplace. So that's what we're really trying to do at Social Traders.
That's great. It is very exciting to see the members grow, and IPA certainly has appreciated the input and support from social traders. And given that we are a fairly large, comparably large social enterprise, better resource than a lot of the smaller ones, particularly work integrated social enterprises, we appreciate the flexibility and the expertise that comes with that as well. So thank you. Jada, I'm sure you've got some experiences as a supplier. We know that you got opportunities in crisis settings, and how do you think it's going to look, or where do you think the challenges might be around intermediaries in business as usual settings?
Well, interesting talking about that role of the intermediary, and you know, we work closely with Kinaway. Of course, you've mentioned on the slide too here, Supply Nation, and there's social traders. And they play a pivotal role especially in that education space, in preparing buyers to engage with Indigenous businesses and to provide that point of, of contact as well, to introduce them to potential businesses that might suit whatever the procurement opportunity is that they have. But I also find that within an organisation, there are advocates or intermediaries within an organisation. They usually sit within that tender team that will be looking at, how do we build into our bid social procurement. And that's the point within an organisation where we get engaged, is when a larger tier one is preparing a bid for a particular project. We'll get really good engagement at that stage with those internal advocates, but then it really quickly falls away after that. So once the contract is awarded, sometimes we just we never hear from them again. Or in one case, it was 2 years later, there had been a change of staff, and a new safety manager had come on board and contacted us and said, I hear that you're our supplier for first aid, and you were awarded that. Can you send me a list of everything that we've been purchasing from you? I'm like, well, it's the first I've heard of it. Had no engagement. So it can be a big disconnect between the people, at that bid phase, who are very engaged and very educated around social procurement and have all the intentions of engaging, but then on the ground, the people who are doing the buying on a project level may not have that same level of education or desire to engage or follow through or relationship. So there's all this fantastic relationship building at the outset, but it just isn't filtering through. And that's not an isolated incident. This happens again and again and again.
Jada, I've had a little preview of the question. James, there is I think a pertinent question there that's on that topic around the points, the point at which this kind of social procurement value or consideration is built into a tender design. Do you want to share that with the panel, and we might be able to build on that discussion a little bit more?
Yes, I can see the one you're talking about. So there's a question to the panel. It says, in regards to the construction industry and pricing government projects, how can we bring social procurement into the tender rather than best price wins being awarded? And how can this be monitored pre-tender rather than incorporating social procurement post-tender?
So I might start with that one, coming from a social enterprise background and feeding into the, I guess, the construction industry as a larger scale sort of projects. Working with those construction organisations, again, it's really about that early engagement, looking at all the potential needs that, the opportunities for a social enterprise. So there could be anything from, cleaning, recycling, setting up all their ATCO office huts, some groundwork that goes into that. So using a grounds maintenance crew that can do those type of things, using a cleaning crew that can obviously come in and clean out those huts over and over, looking at if it's a major roads projects, we've got social enterprises that can make traffic signs, can do traffic management, but it's also about, you know, what's the capacity or capability of those individual social enterprises, and then how can they be savvy enough to actually join together? So how can they, you know, expand their capability and capacity by joining with another social enterprise that can actually expand that? So from my background working in a social enterprise, Latrobe Valley Enterprises, we partnered with both New Start, which is an Indigenous organisation, to deliver on the Parramatta Light Rail project. So we would make the signage, they would install it, and also partnered with YMCA Rebuild in Victoria to do a similar thing where, you know, where as an organisation we're sign makers, not installers, but it was then partnering with somebody else that can then expand and deliver on, you know, a much larger project. So it's really just engaging with the social enterprises and looking for opportunities to, you know, everywhere, look around yourself and look at all opportunities to really engage. So our team at Social Traders, that's what our group do in our social procurement services, is they do that opportunity planning session with those big consortiums and major projects. So they really start to pull apart what are the needs of the project, where are the opportunities for a social enterprise to be engaged, and how can we maybe set up a social enterprise collaborative to deliver some major outcomes.
I'd just like to add to that too, Wendy, because it sounds like things are quite similar on both sides of the Tasman. We had a similar thing. We've got a massive rebuild going on in Auckland, and before Amotai spun out of council, we were very aware of this rebuild project, and the approach in construction back then was, or at that time, was for that particular job, they were going to just demolish all of these houses and they were going to go to landfill. And so using more of a social enterprise lens, but focused on an Indigenous business, one of our building companies, he was a Samoan guy with a fairly big workforce, and he initially was focused on how can I get in and get some of these building contracts. But when he saw that they were knocking the houses down, he changed and he put in a tender to deconstruct the buildings, therefore, and then recycle the buildings, put them into containers and send them to the Pacific Islands, where there had recently been a cyclone right across the Pacific. So he built in some really good social outcomes. So he was diverting all that stuff from landfill. He was doing something good to be a good neighbour. And actually he priced himself at a point where I think he was a few $1 million more expensive than just the straight up knock it down. But what the contractor recognised was that there were a lot of social gains for them, that they were going to be, like I said, environmentally diverting it away. They were going to be a good neighbour. They were going to be contracting with a Pacific business who employed a lot of Pacific and Māori people. So he was successful. But another thing that he did, which again aligns with what you were saying, Wendy, is that there were parts of those buildings that were not going to be any good for rebuilding or reusing in that way. And so he partnered with a local woman in Auckland City whose passion is building things, and she got all the offcuts, and she then pre-cut them into lounge, actually, you know, those sun chairs that you lean back on, pre-cut them all, and then she'd go around schools and, you know, local groups, and she'd show them how to build their own lounge chair, which they got to keep because, hey, the wood had cost her nothing. So, yeah, I think that's the thing, is being able to work early and advocate when organisations are beginning to think about how they'll put it together and what that contract might look like and what the outcomes are that they're looking for. And yeah, he was very lucky, and he's gone on to build a very, very successful business over the last 5 years. Yeah, there are ways in the construction sector.
I think what both of you have mentioned is, that early engagement and the quality of that engagement, relationship building and communication is key. Pre-bid, pre-tender, and being able to have the information that a company needs as well. Most commonly, our first engagement or in construction is we get sent an email, usually through our website, just saying, can you send us your price list? I'm like, that's not a way to start any relationship, right? And usually it's very difficult to get past that when the engagement starts that way. How long's a piece of string? We've got thousands of items, right? What's the need for the project? What's your ramp up schedule look like? How many people have you got on the project? Do you have a certain mandate? So I'm talking from a PPE perspective. There's a whole bunch of information that we also need as a company to assess whether that project's the right fit for us. What's your service expectation? Does that fit with our business model? And so being willing to engage in those conversations and having the intention, to build relationships that's beyond just the project as well, usually yields the best everybody, in my experience.
I'm so glad that question prompted such useful input from everybody there. Thank you. James, I'm not sure if anyone has posted any others on Q&A. I couldn't see any, but I did see something in the chat about impact reporting, which is close to my heart.
That's
Nina
right.
and Elise posted something. Do you want to share that?
Yeah, so we did have a couple of similar questions, as you say. So wondering if the panel has insights or can share in what ways stakeholders are reporting on and using outcomes and impact data. Also a question around do any intermediaries provide impact measurement and reporting? And also, sorry, just to add on to that, to give a little bit more context to the general gist of these questions, is that impact measurement can be costly and often falls onto the social enterprise or Indigenous business as an additional cost provision on top of delivering the product or service. So what responsibility or cost can be offset through the procuring organisation or the certifier or verified impact measurement?
I'll just mention before we launch into any answers that we have 6 minutes before we're due to finish. So let's try to keep our responses targeted.
I might jump in because obviously at Social Traders we do impact reporting. So we actually work with both sides of the market. We take data from both our social enterprises and our buyer and government members, business and government members, and really use that. We look at, training data, we look at employment numbers, we look at spend data, any tons of waste diverted from landfill, we look at additional funds going out to charities. So and, the size and the types of social enterprises. So we actually do that impact reporting for the organisation. So it's a matter of them just then providing us some data and we then pull that reporting together. So I guess we take some of that arduous sort of work off the organisations, and we're just looking now as a future development to look at the SDGs and the GRIS international framework as well, to expand on that, to bring in some more environmental outcomes.
That's great. And then also speaking from the social enterprise perspective, that's obviously my role, is building out the impact measurement and making sure that we're collecting the data that is pertinent to the outcomes that we're supporting. We have a bit of an interesting business model, but definitely having Social Traders facilitate at least a framework of impact reporting that we can then build on is the approach that we're taking. But definitely the onus and I guess the responsibility and perhaps even the best expertise lies within the supplier or the social enterprise, I would argue, because often they're the ones who have the mission associated with the social value that they're seeking to generate in providing services or products to market. And then tying it into corporate responsibility frameworks, aligning it with the SDGs is a great example. And I know that I've had discussions with social traders about that too. So it's great to hear that that's developing as well. I think that we might start bringing the discussion to a close, if that's all right with everybody. Nods, shaking of heads. We're good. All right. So what we can do is just close off on what the... We did have opportunity of a further poll. However, this is just a general question about what further information you would require. And there is an opportunity to do that in a survey. So we won't launch that poll now. Feel free to add that to the comments in the chat if you wish. So we're at the stage of having concluded our fantastic discussion around boost supply. Just wanted to say thank you again for everybody's very active participation and input. The panel has had a fantastic conversation, and I hope that you've drawn a lot of insights from it. We can see from the comments in the chat that that has been the case, so thank you. We are hoping to develop some more FAQ guidance, so please do send any questions or feedback on your burning questions to help grow social procurement activity. IPA takes that opportunity very seriously, and we want to be able to support that. You can see the participants and our partners here on this slide. Please do reach out to them via their socials or LinkedIn profiles. And please do join us for another conversation, which is going to be focusing on building skills for procurement professionals in March, just ahead of the CIPS conference. And I guess that brings us to a close. If you have any questions you wish, you can send them to me at alisoncarter@ipa.com.au or at socialprocurement@ipa.com.au. It's been an absolute pleasure to Wendy, Jada, Herani, and thank you again, James. And to everybody, stay safe, have a fantastic rest of your day, and we'll see you again next time.